Thank you. Awesome. Number one, thank you guys so much for being here. NSCA has been an organization that I grew up in, and you'll see after I start giving you some examples, you'll probably figure out how long. It's been quite a while. But it is such an honor and privilege, and it's because of the people that are involved with NSCA. Not only the staff, the incredible people that are helping out at headquarters, but also every one of us as members that we get to interact with and network with and learn from. So I'm learning every day and hopefully bringing a beginner's mind to it every day so that we just continue to learn and hopefully share some things with you. Focus of today is going to obviously be some hands-on and some demos, some things that I want to be able to look at how we actually take some of the approaches of looking at progression, specifically in two particular movements. I had to kind of choose. Nick Clayton actually had asked me, can you talk about progression, regression, and there's a whole list of movements that we could choose, but what we decided to do is go with the deadlift and the squat, because right now when we look at how many different things those patterns actually apply to, it will allow us to do a whole lot more. We can really build on those patterns. And so what I want to do is actually take us down a thought process and then give some examples of how we continue to coach better technique on the floor. So I did break my finger, so if I give you an inappropriate gesture, don't take it personally, okay? All right, so when we look at this first movement, it really doesn't even matter why we're doing this, but the guy on the left, would you load that? Right? It's pretty obvious which one's good and which one's bad. You can see the motor control, you can see the stability, you can see the ability to go a little bit deeper and not compensate through that movement. We just know, man, the one on the left looks pretty ugly, right? Now let's look at this next movement. If I'm coming to stop and decelerate myself, again, is this somebody that I would go, man, I would want to just load her up and do 20 jump squats, right? When we look at the quality and the pattern of movement, what do you see? You can kind of see that something's going on, right? That valgus collapse. And so when I look at my opportunities to say, okay, can I make that movement better? There's several different approaches that we can take. And what I want to be able to do is know that I'm preparing people for not only building gains in physical capacity, but I want to know that I'm making the movements better so they can also handle chaotic situations that they're thrown into, whether it be life, whether it be a sport. I want to make sure I'm building on these basic progressions and using some good skill sets to develop that. Now, just as a caveat right here, when we look at how do we think about movement prerequisites, all I mean by that is, do they have the fundamental movement to even look at loading these exercises or doing the movements specific to these movement patterns? And so the reason I want to mention this is I'm a big believer in having tools in my toolbox that allow me to do that. Whatever you feel is an important screen or tool that allows you to say, do they have fundamental ability to move? I think it's important to pull that tool out and be able to say, do they have that movement baseline? And when you look at the neurodevelopmental sequence, all that means is from the time we're born to about the age of 3, how we layer movements early on is very much how we relearn as adults. So when I look at the ability to relearn movement patterns, I want to pay attention to some of these mobility and stability demands that we learned very early on. I mean, look, he's even got such a great little neutral spine there, right? Up. Let's take you the right way. Now, neurodevelopmental sequence, I just want to mention this. If you look up the Movement Restoration Project, Brandon Hetzler has done some really fantastic work with that. He really looks at how that applies to some fundamental movements. And when we look at starting with crawling, prone, quadruped, we get to this transitional level when we talk about sitting, kneeling, squatting, that brings us up to more of a basic functional level. How do we transition in those squatting and hip hinging patterns coming from a transitional position into a more dynamic position. And that's some of the fundamental things that when we talk about movement competency, we want to make sure are there. So in my personal experience, I do, just as a disclaimer, I do instruct for FMS. I took on a position with them as education director, but the reason I did that was because I learned that when I looked at some of the fundamental things that I was doing in my practice, I was applying a lot of these great corrective strategies. I was learning from a lot of people that I really admire, but what FMS did allow me to do is have a filter to be able to put those things through and say, do I really even need to be working on the pattern, or am I just throwing good stuff against the wall going, we know it's good, but did I really know that that person needed it? So it just gives me a filter for that movement baseline and to set that baseline. And it lets me understand, do they have the prerequisite movements, and for me, core sequencing. And what I mean by that, does the core communicate? Does the central nervous system and the core actually communicate in the right timing and sequencing to really allow the limb movements to be effective? And so when I think about stabilizing my lumbopelvic hip complex, to really understand where in space my pelvis is, how it actually affects that movement, and you'll really see it in the hip hinge movements like a deadlift and going into your squat, do I know that it has the ability to do that? So I'm pointing this out just because if you don't have those things in your toolbox, it could be a really great thing to add as you move forward. And then, of course, timing of the joint stabilizers. The joint stabilizers aren't designed to be these really big, powerful muscles like the prime movers, but the timing and sequencing of those muscles allow the movement to happen in a nice, fluid, and successful manner. It's allowing that to actually be on a guided path where they've got neuromuscular control. Because as you saw the valgus collapse when that girl landed, by the way, if you've ever seen that video before, she's what? She's a female basketball player that just got released to go back to play. And luckily met the right people to do a little bit more work before she did that. But when we look at some of the things that we're looking at here, timing of the joint stabilizers, again, when we're coaching technique and paying attention to these things, going through some type of screen or baseline allows us to make sure that they have that ability. And we continue to work on that in a supplemental fashion. So when we look at some of the key things to both of these movement patterns, I think of neutral spine as, we call it safe spine at our facility. We call it safe spine because simply that's what we're trying to achieve, is a safe position to load and make sure they understand the relationship of that pelvic position to really be able to load and coil that spring in the direction that it's intended and not overflex or overextend in a position that leaves them very vulnerable. And when I talk about key functional progressions or sequencing, I want to make sure those things are in place before I start loading them. So the cool thing about a lot of stuff that Coach Dose did earlier, and even Joe Sanzalone, the session before that, we're taking the movement technique and coaching these different variations so that we can really build these patterns into something that's a lot more sustainable and adaptable. Because I know I want to be able to load them more. I'm a big believer in heavy squats. I'm a big believer in doing the power movements. I do think that they have to have fundamental patterning first, and sometimes we bring in these variations to challenge the movement pattern and make sure it knows how to handle those loads. And so that's part of what we're going to look at today. When we look at safe spine position and different postures, the key here is that when I look at somebody as talented as Pavel, who's one of the most brilliant movers that you'll ever see, he obviously founder of Strong First. If you want, strongfirst.com, definitely give him credit there. You look at somebody like him that has a hip hinge, his body understands how to have and maintain the natural curves. You stack the pelvis, which I like to talk very simply to my clients and athletes. The bucket, I want to make sure that bucket is full of water and it's not pouring out the front, it's not pouring out the back, or either side. Some people say it's the martini glass. It just depends where you work, right? If it was Gunner, it'd probably be a martini glass. When you look at some of these different things in positioning, think about how you're getting some inner abdominal pressure to protect the spine. I think of that dome of my rib cage over that nice bucket underneath. And if I can create good pressure top and bottom, it's going to allow me to maintain a safe position for the spine, and hopefully it's with a nice natural position of that lower back. And we're going to look at that a little bit in the hands-on in a second. I also think of it as spine lengthening, and we're going to talk about that. One of the things is that when you want to find somebody in their true neutral position, they should feel nice and tall. If they're testing their pelvis rolling out, rolling under, that nice halfway point should be the tallest point that they feel in their crown. And you can actually test that and partner with each other and feel that, so that you know that when we make that spine nice and long, we're actually in a good position to have a nice, safe spine position, okay? So the goals that we're looking at here again is preparing for gains in physical capacity, movement efficiency, and handling chaos, because that's the goal of where we want to take this to. So when we're progressing intensity, there's different things that we can use. You heard Coach Dose constantly coaching technique while he was training. Same thing, that feedback, really being involved in that session and making sure that we're not just turning ourselves away after we've introduced an exercise. It's really taking the opportunity to make that movement pattern better, and that's something that we don't want to miss out on. And then challenging that base of support by changing the base, but can I maintain the integrity of the movement pattern? That's why we look at the value of going to a 2-foot stance, to a split stance, to a single leg stance when we're looking at some of these progressions. And then of course lever arm, and how the lever arm affects our center of mass, how it loads over our base, is one of those key parts as well, is that we can really alter how the body handles that and how it's challenged by some of the movements and exercises that we choose. And then of course speed of movement and where that load is placed. So those are some of the things that we're going to base this on as we move forward. Okay, let's everybody come right here in the back. We're going to move right around. Oh wow, we had kettlebells even more show up. It's awesome. Thanks guys. I like it, I like it. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is you're just going to move right around me. We're going to make a little bit of a circle right here. Now, one of the things that I want you to just point out is that when we have those movement prerequisites, I like the baseline that the FMS provides. Sometimes I just wanted to mention this so that you could actually explore this on your own, or you can ask a little bit after the session if you want more information, is there's additional screens that you can use. So what I mean by that is sometimes our movements are restricted, and maybe mobility or the restriction of movement is not opening up the motor learning pathway. And a lot of times we don't look at this with our clients. So if I have somebody that's really struggling to squat, and I see that in my basic pattern, and they're basically here, things to explore would be, is there an ankle mobility problem? Okay, do they have proper ankle mobility? Do they have a true toe touch? When I think about a hip hinge, can I actually bend over, touch my toes? Does my body understand the movement pattern of weight shifting? And then having a very natural curve to touch my toes. And so just so you know, some of these basic patterns is very simply fingertips to toe tips. And can they do that? And if they can't, take a step back and rebuild that pattern. There's very simple, quick ways to do that. And so if you want more information on that, there's some great information. Ankle range of movement, range of motion screen just simply means, can I take my shoe off here? Can I drive my knee directly forward towards my second toe, heel down? I like to do this barefoot so I can really see if that heel's down. And can I get a minimum of 3 inches? Or that tells me I should be working on some ankle mobility work along with what we're doing to be successful at a squat. Otherwise, the prerequisites aren't there. The other one would be some of the squat depth screens. There's several that you can go to. Can I just have somebody volunteer to help me out with this example? I promise it's not real difficult. Oh, awesome, thank you. What's your name? Jonathan. Jonathan? Yeah. Okay, so Jonathan's gonna help me out. Can you get in a quadruped position? knees. So we're going to start him out. And all this is looking at is I want you guys to think about how important it is to have this nice spine position here, where he's going to be able to maintain a good position, nice lordotic curve. Let's bring you up, okay? And so he's got a pretty, have you done this one before? Okay, so let's go a little bit wider on the knees. Think of him as if I flipped him up and he's squatting. Does he have the prerequisites in maintaining this, what I call safe spine position, to even know that he can get below parallel and maintain and give me a good position? A lot of times I'll have people up in this position, and as they slide back his butt towards his heels, bracing nice and tight here, you're going to see a change. You'll see them start to round. I want to know that he can sit back, which he's doing a great job. I go a little bit wider on the knees because if I bring him narrow right underneath the hips, that would be like doing a narrow squat position, right? This is more of a natural position, the way that we would squat. So this just allows you a little bit of that understanding of, do they have the prerequisite to actually get into this position? And if you want to look up more from Stuart McGill, there's a lot of great things. I stay away from some of the manual testing and manual positions because I'm a personal trainer. I'm not qualified to assess in terms of some of the manual positions, but I can take something simple like this and go, if he can do this, he should be able to stand on his feet and give me that prerequisite. If he can't, it's more technique and it's motor control, and we can work through that. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, Jonathan, thank you very much. All right, so if we look at the deadlift technique itself, the reason we're going to approach the deadlift first is basically when we look at how it loads the posterior chain, that positive tension of the posterior chain, it gives us a lot of very important aspects of using our hips as we now move more vertically into our squat. So the order of that I prefer is to work on my deadlift so that I can improve my squat. I don't not do one or the other, but what I want to do is make sure I'm using this deadlift pattern to constantly enhance my squat, and actually, if I can show the prerequisites in both, I should be able to make that technique better and better and better, okay? And so, Jonathan, do you mind helping me out? So if I'm looking at a deadlift pattern, I want you guys to know, what are we looking for? So as we start coaching each other through this to what we can really see in terms of a pattern, is I want to know that Jonathan knows what that nice, tall, safe spine position is. And so what I'd like him to do is just literally roll the pelvis forward, anterior tilt, so going forward first, now back. Okay, let's take nice and tall. Okay, looking straight. And then I want to see where he feels most comfortable. He's got a nice position here. This is going to be the start where I want to start from a tall position. Now I want him reaching back with his hips. So actually just maintain neutral. I'm actually going to ask you to hip hinge. I just want you to reach towards that back wall with your hips going into your deadlift pattern. As we go into it, what I want to know is, can he reach back so that his shoulders are above his hips are above his knees? Okay? I don't want an L position, common mistake. And a lot of times we may know it as trainers, but we want to make sure we're looking for that. Maintaining a fairly neutral position, I don't mind if they have to look up slightly, but I want as much neutral position here in the cervical, because the minute they do this, it changes the information coming down into the spine. And so the more neutral we can maintain it here, the better it's going to be, okay? And so when I look at this hip hinge, I'm looking for that V position, and I really want him to feel the tension on his posterior chain. It should be like that slingshot. I want to feel that tension, and if I'm not feeling any tension across the posterior chain, I'm either not reaching back enough, or more than anything, you'll see them do that L position where the shoulders he starts looking more like a table, okay? When we look at this position here too, I want to know that he's fairly vertical in the shin. And so I just want you to know some of the key factors that we're looking for in the deadlift. And so from this point on, go ahead and come up. Whoa, That just flew forward. See where she's got that dowel rod on her back, okay? I love using sticks for feedback because it allows me to get 3 points of contact, the head, the mid-back, and the tailbone. But even if we don't have sticks right now, we can partner and imagine that line right there. That's the one we want to maintain. And as our partner reaches back, we should see that they maintain that nice position. And just like Dose did against the wall, what we would love to do is take somebody like Jonathan, come right over here, and be able to take Jonathan very quickly and say, turn away from the wall. Let's start about a foot length away. So get about a foot length away. He's in a nice position here. I just want him to be able to reach back to the wall and get that external feedback, okay? So as you reach back, reach back, reach back, reach back. Good, you can see he starts to come down just slightly, but his shoulders are still above the hips. But what I want him to do is come back up nice and tall. And now I really want you to reach straight back. So he's got some good control. I prefer the feet to stay flat. Once they start toeing up here, it creates a bad pattern. I want them to feel the ground and not so much lose that and allow the toes to fly up, okay? So that's what we're looking for in a good deadlift pattern, is that nice neutral position and to be able to extend coming through there and have a really good control of the center of mass. Because when somebody makes that mistake here, imagine that glow ball behind your belly button, right? Is that glow ball basically starts moving way out, especially if I have weight out here, the center of mass becomes here and the tension becomes right across that low back. When we properly reach back with those hips, now it's right over our base of support. And that's what we want to be sure we're teaching all the way through these different patterns, okay? So here's what I'd want you guys to do really quick is pick a partner and then take them through just really quickly. I want you to see as they move back, if they can reach back without losing, no rounding here, right? I want you to see where their range of motion is as they reach back towards that wall, okay? So we're going to do that really quickly, and then we're going to jump right into the next one, okay? So get your partner. We'll go ahead and move right into that. Good. Really watch that spine position. When we're looking at this movement, use the cue to touch the wall with your hips. Reach back to the wall. Use that external cue. If you feel good, take about a ½ inch or an inch out, little increments out away from the wall. Make sure those shoulders do not go below the hips. Don't turn that into an L. Good job. Make sure you're maintaining that nice V position. V. There you go. Good job, good job. Much better, much better. Okay, so here we go. Let's bring it back in. Sorry, go ahead, go ahead. I get so excited. So if you didn't have a chance to try it, let your partner try it. Watch that position. Take a little step out. Feel that pattern. And now what I want you to do is come back out here. So now we're going to actually apply that and use what they learned and what they feel. Now, one of the things that we'll look at is when I think of R&T, I think about it as giving feedback. And so when we talk about feedback, the dowel rod's essentially giving feedback. If you see somebody collapsing inward, which we see that more in the squat than we do the deadlift, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the squat. But there is ways to use that R&T with the deadlift pattern, but I want you to start thinking about, it's basically feeding the mistake. Reactive neuromuscular training, in my sense of the word, there's ways you go way beyond that in physical therapy and use it for different techniques. in a very simplistic way, we can apply it as trainers and say, how do we feed the mistake and get a better pattern because they feel it better. So what I mean by that is if the knees are caving in and we put that band around their knees and pull them together, they're going to more reflexively feel that and want to correct that mistake. We're going to look at that a little bit more. What I want you guys to do right here is I want you guys to coach and work with each other through this deadlift pattern that we just talked about. Where's my demo guy? Can you help me out? You didn't know that volunteering the first time.
That's all right, I'm okay with that.
You just got voluntold, I'm sorry. All right, so what we want to do with the deadlift, especially when we start applying this to different movements, everything that we just saw on the wall, every single one of these cues, I want to see when I apply a different foot position or I will apply a different loading position. So if we go for a very simple two-leg deadlift, I'm basically going to ask Jonathan to move up so that basically that kettlebell's more, even a little bit more. One of the biggest mistakes that we do in personal training is we allow that kettlebell out in front. When I do that, it immediately encourages that displacement of the center of mass into that low back, and it encourages that mistake of them doing this. So what I want him to do is I want him to find the kettlebell by using his hip hinge and reach back, grab it, and come up, okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do on this one. So we're going to go ahead and bring it back down. See? That was awesome. Okay, here's what we're going to do. The same pattern you just went to put it down, we're going to use to pick it back up, okay? So I want you to really reach back. All you're going to think about is reaching back with the hips. Grab it, and then come up. Good, crush the grip, come back up. He's got a nice position here. He really tightens the lat, so he has a strong connection with the kettlebell to his torso. Very important. He's going to reach back with his hips and make sure that he's using that hip hinge and not a squat to bring it back down. And we're going to go through that pattern, okay? So that's the two-legged pattern. So when we look at bringing it into that two-legged pattern, we can now say, okay, we saw what the hips are doing. We saw that he's moving back into that V. So now if I try to give him a little bit better advantage of using that external rotation of his feet in a little bit wider position, some people are limited. And here's the thing. When do you use sumo and when do you use traditional? The one is the answer we all hate to hear, right? It depends. Anatomically, if I've got short arms, longer femurs, it's going to be better for me to do, or easier to establish a good pattern with sumo, right? Vice versa, somebody else that has a different anatomical layout, right, blueprint, they're going to be able to go right through a traditional deadlift, no problem whatsoever. I want to explore both, and I use both. So when we open up that pattern, what I want to make sure that you do is watch your partner. We may not all get to do every single movement, but we'll try some of these movements, then flip with your partner on the next one. It's coming in here. I want to see the exact same movement pattern at the hips. It should almost look like I can't see his feet. Nothing else should change. Does that make sense? So meaning that if I get him a little bit wider, and I ask Jonathan, he's going to have a nice neutral tall position. Your hands are going to be really close to your body. And then as you go into this position, I want you to reach back, and I want to see that same pattern all the way through the torso into the hips. Okay? Good. Finishing at the top, I even like to see a little posterior tilt. That vertical plank is really important to establish at that top position. So now we look at that sumo, meaning wide foot position, the advantage of opening up, especially opening up into the cavity of some people's hips, allows a little bit better range of motion and control in that hip hinge reaching back. Okay? So when we try both of those, we're going to go double leg, sumo, and now, again, when I actually look at a single leg deadlift, can we see the exact same pattern again and not allow it to get sloppy? Okay? Do you have a favorite leg? Okay. So since you don't, you get to just randomly flip a coin, pick a leg. Usually everybody's got a favorite leg.
I'll go left.
Okay, he'll go left. So same thing, don't allow, the minute people most common mistake we see in a lot of personal training is all of a sudden we go to a single leg, loading position changes, and they're out here. I want to make sure that I'm actually getting in a position here to where I'm going to go down and reach for that kettlebell, work it from the ground up, nice and tight. I want to see the same hip hinge. If he's on his left and I'm looking at Jonathan from this side, nothing should change. I should be able to see the exact same pattern. And that's what we don't want to let our clients get away with, is changing that pattern. Okay? So go ahead. Good, nice neutral spine here. So what I want you to do, think nice and tall. Okay, let's go ahead and put it right back down. Cool. So think about, again, I'm gonna get to the kettlebell by reaching back with my hip here. Here's the key. He looked really good most of the way down. In a perfect world, we could have a step right here that brought it a little bit closer to him. It's going to be a great place to start for a lot of people. I'd rather work a good range of motion versus encouraging a bad pattern. That's why we're trying to coach through this. So actually doing it one more time, but just think about hinging back, using that hip hinge to get your hand to the kettlebell. Nice neutral spine. Good. Actively reaching back with that leg. Don't let them do the tail wag, right? It's very hard for them to engage one side where the other side is literally not engaged and putting them in a disadvantage. So really look at the length that we have there, keeping the spine nice and long all the way through that single leg pattern, okay? What are some of the things that we might want to correct with that? What's a common thing that happens with a single leg deadlift or any single leg stance? They collapse. Or they open up, right? The body's smart. It's going to want to try to figure out, how do I get this thing, how do I get over the base of support? What we're asking it to do is say, no, I want the hips to do the work. I don't want it to get away without doing that work. So one of the things, and we've got some bands over here, so when you grab a kettlebell with your partner, go ahead and grab a band as well. Whoa. I have my favorite bands. I like the Cook bands just because of the way these are designed. So if Jonathan is on his left and he's opening up, okay? This is an example of R&T. Sorry, Jonathan, I just poked him with my bad finger. It just stays extended. I didn't. The key here is if I want to pull him into his mistake, let's pretend he opened up. If I just pull him straight across, spin him this way, is that really the pattern that we're feeding? It's not just a straight rotation. If I diagonally, because as he's going down, a lot of people are going to start to open up here, I want to feed that information into that hip. So if I use a diagonal pattern to be able to feed that mistake very lightly, okay, and I guarantee there'll be some people in here that'll be great to try this with, is if he goes now down for that pattern, it's just giving him just enough feedback for him to feel his mistake even more. It exaggerates his mistake. And make sure he maintains that V pattern, really reaching back with the hips. You're looking for quality here. So the whole thing is if we do these things to really build the pattern really strong, I'm going to be able to load them more, they'll be more durable, and they'll adapt to my higher level training much quicker, okay? So this is just an example of how we could feed that mistake. And that's really what R&T in our sense of the word is intended to do, okay? So let's do this. We've got kettlebells on each end. We can partner up. We might have to put 3 or 4, more than 2 people in a group. But let's grab a kettlebell. Let's grab a band. There's some great Cook bands right here. And let's go ahead and put those together. So we'll go double leg, sumo, and single leg and work through that technique. All right. You got it? So just get around a kettlebell, help each other out. So we can spread out, come out to the middle of the room, find yourself some room, and partner up so you can coach through this. Partner up so you can coach. You've got some super bands. All right. So step number one, we're going to go double leg. Step number one, go double leg. Place that right in between your feet, right in between the base. We can do a double leg several different ways. We're going to talk about different loading patterns here in a second. But really get nice and tall, use that hip hinge to come down, and do they maintain that safe spine position? So coaches, help each other out. Okay, go ahead and give me a few reps. Good job, guys. V position, really coach and help each other out. Don't turn it into a tabletop. If it's too much going to the ground, stop before you get to the ground. Great feedback, right? All right, guys. Good. Once you see the two-leg deadlift position, how that feels, V back, coach each other through this. Don't let them turn into an L. Reach back with the hips, reach back. Good job. Now switch your foot position. Switch the feet to turn out about 30 degrees or so, just slightly toe out, get a little bit wider. Now coaches, be active with your people. Don't worry about getting all the way to the ground if they're not able to get to the ground. Pretend that there's a step there that you're setting it on top of. I want a good position on every single repetition. V, make sure that the shoulders stay above the hips. Shoulders stay above the hips. Good job. Good job, good job. Now, once you've tried the sumo, takes a little bit longer. Once you feel that you've tried the sumo position, go ahead and move that to a single leg. Can you make that look just as good on a single leg and maintain that safe spine position and that V all the way back? Good. A real easy cue if they're opening up, if you don't have a band, if they're opening up, you can put your fingers right underneath their hip bone and tell them to basically press into your hip, into your hand. Good. Make sure that kettlebell stays back by your foot. Don't let that come way out in front. Good job, guys. All right. Oh, okay. You guys good? Can I steal your time? Okay. Okay. All right. Good job, guys. Can you see that? Now really quick, if I could have your attention real quick, if I look at the deadlift pattern and I look at when I say load carriage or how I'm carrying my load, if I'm going two legs, what are different loading patterns that I could use? Once I see that we're great right here, if I go from center, right, with two hands, I can go to a suitcase carry. This is fantastic to look at that anti-rotation. Now, can I control a safe spine position? Not have compensatory movement in the upper body. It should look, if I've got one kettlebell in my hand, oh, ooh, it's heavy, right? It works, it works. If I'm here, can I maintain? It should look like I have two kettlebells in my hand, right? The movement's here. Don't make the mistake of putting this hand out here just because this one's loaded. I want to make it look here, but I want to resist that. And I don't want to overcompensate and pull out of position either. That's why some of the asymmetrical loads are so valuable to change that up with our clients, and we're constantly changing that to influence their pattern, okay? The other part to that would be is if you wanted to look at different positions on the single leg deadlift, of course, coming here, a very challenging one is to go outside suitcase carry to make sure they don't go into that. But that's quite a bit more advanced. That's something I'm going to throw at them after they've mastered that single leg deadlift. So it just gives you an idea of how we can take these sequences and start layering in the challenges based on the movement pattern. Real quick note here is first pull versus Romanian. What's the difference? Yes?
Romanian deadlift way more hamstring than anything else?
She's saying is Romanian deadlift way more, much more hamstring? It could be, yes?
You already have the barbell right here.
There we go. It's loaded from the top down. It's loaded from the top down versus from the ground up. We like to teach from the ground up first. It doesn't mean that the Romanian's a bad movement, but a lot of people will bounce off the bottom, stressing the low back and hiding the fact, can I really maintain my safe spine position? And so a lot of times we encourage that rolling and posterior tilt at that end range because it's bouncing off the bottom on the Romanian deadlift. They get here eccentrically, they can't handle it, and you'll see them literally almost rebound out of that position. So I think Romanian deadlifts can be very valuable. Just make sure that you're looking for that so that that doesn't catch up on you as a mistake or you're not encouraging that bad pattern. Okay? Perfect. I paid her to say that. Right? Really quick note, Joe Sansalone had a fantastic, when we think about the deadlift pattern and adding speed, speed can always be added for power and for challenging a movement. And when I think of the kettlebell swing, obviously the trajectory of how I'm using the hips to get back very ballistically, the things that we're looking for in a kettlebell swing, we're not going to go through it here, but I want to make sure you understand why it's up there. And strong first, again, highly recommend using them as a resource. They're fantastic. When you look at the position on the picture right there to where he has got a fantastic, what we would call hike position, he's getting set up to hike that kettlebell through the tall part of his, up into almost his groin area. You want to think of the knees up into the hips as kind of like your A-frame, and I want to hike right through that A-frame. That takes a lot of control and trajectory. He's got a great hip hinge. He's going to start the movement with shoulders above the hips, hips above the knees. Big mistake is most people will just be swinging in our gyms like this, way out of position and very sloppy. This is meant to be, that really is one of the best exercises when done correctly because they really tie in the lat connection to the torso. They come in here to where when they hike back, the arms come right to the side, and then as they feel that positive tension that we talked about, that tension loads that spring. And now once they feel that tension, it's a trigger to now really drive. And we see a little bit of that finish up nice and tall into that vertical plank, and the kettlebell comes right at about shoulder, probably no more than eye height. Okay? The reason that we're looking for that drive, and I put it here, there's a great article on Strong First. I believe it was Mike Perry. I want to give the person credit. Do you know what Newton's cradle is? It's that thing on the desk that's the 5 balls. When you pull a ball out and it hits, the other 4 balls have a connection. So when it hits and it's got that solid connection, the ball on the other side flies off. One of the best analogies for a kettlebell swing I've ever heard. Because if I do it, thank you, and I drive back correctly, and as I come through, this is like pulling the ball back, and now driving through is like making that strong connection and hitting all the way through, and now the ball flies forward, and now it comes back. That's one of the best analogies of that nice, strong connection that I've heard, okay? And when we look at these progressions, there's just so many great ways that, again, we can use some of the, I'm very visual, so these analogies. The American swing, I'm not saying that it's bad. By American swing, I'm saying the one that comes up here, is think about what you lose in that lat connection once you open up that much. And I think risk reward in position, and I lose that dynamic stability of the torso and the safe spine. Most people will end up losing that at the top. If it's reinforcing non-productive things, I don't want to be a part of that. We want to make sure and coach them through positive stuff. Okay. Right. Especially, and some of them will do it slowly and not use the momentum. And it's just, you know, again, that was intended. I mean, there's people that have practiced that so that people could just feel the load and catch, almost like a snatch, catch that up here. If you can argue the purpose behind it, I don't think there's any bad exercise, but make sure you know why you're doing it if you're asking them to do something like that, okay? Now, when we look at squat patterns, I wanted to be sure that's the thought process. When we think about sequencing, I'm going to talk you guys through the squat pattern so you can see how this actually applies. Some of the common questions that we deal with is that butt wink, right? Is it okay by butt wink, the rolling of the hips? If I'm going into a squat and you see that, is that okay? Right? Same way with positioning my safe spine position. If I've got the prerequisites and I know there's no ankle restrictions, I've got a screen like the FMS to tell me there's no I'm not missing any of the building components for the squat, then I should be able to squat and work on my technique. I shouldn't need to be able to have that roll of the hips underneath. And think about what's attached to the hips, what's attached to the pelvis, sacrum, your lumbar, right? We see that the minute we roll, it leaves that into an extended position that basically that roll is going to leave them very vulnerable when they basically flex the lumbar spine under load and then come out of it. So there's a lot of arguments that says, but if it's just body weight, right? Well, my problem is if I practice it that way with body weight, a lot of times it starts to transfer when I go to a loaded position because it becomes part of their movement pattern and their programming. So we want to be able to say, is that the position that we're looking for? I want to reinforce that every single time through the movement. And that's what's required. And squats are more of that vertical loading. I'm coiling the spring vertically more than using the hip hinge in that more frontal plane, but using that nice long system, lever system. Here, I'm using the flexibility of my ankles, knees, and hips to drop more vertically. I need to have those prerequisites there. When I think about the butt wink, that's part of making sure I have a safe spine position. Squat, if everybody takes their feet forward really quick, and in a perfect world, imagine that you're on valve slides, right? Or a slick surface. If I squeeze my glutes and see where my feet land, that's a pretty good indication of where my external rotation, where my toe position should be. Because that's where my body wants to find the open position of the hips. So that's about how much turnout I'm going to use. And I might have to play with my position or my width to see how successfully I can take it through that movement, okay? Squat the screen versus squat the exercise. There's people that teach, just like in the FMS screen, toes forward. The reason that we're looking for toes forward is to see the maximum range of motion and mobility that person can achieve. When I go to the squat the exercise, I'm going to allow them a natural toe out position to be healthy and safe for that hip position. Okay, and that's the difference. Okay, perfect. So when we go through some of these variations, really quick, we've run out of time. I always try to put too much in my presentations. I apologize. We've got some videos that I will absolutely share with you that go through a lot of these basic cueing and patterning, so please don't hesitate to email me. But when we look at the basic patterning, facing the wall, if you're in here with dose, it's one of the best exercises. I use my hanging bags, any kind of barrier, even the squat rack in front of me. So you could be against a wall right here, and it teaches them to get that natural position right up against the wall about 4 to 6 inches out, and then drop, and can they do it maintaining that position without a butt wink? Okay? That's what we're looking for. Can they give me a good position all the way up and down? And once they can do that, we use that in our warm-ups all the time, very specific to the squat. And then looking at changing the base, again, 2 foot to split squat to single leg stance. Can I mimic basically my technique and not lose anything when I change my foot position? Some people think of them as different exercises. When I look at my hip movement and what the prerequisites are for the ankle, knee, and hip to actually descend vertically, it should look exactly the same. It shouldn't look like a different exercise. Okay? Yes?
When you do the squat facing the wall, do you force them to keep their feet forward, or allow them to go?
I allow them to toe out, because that's exactly how they're going to access the mobility. If I force them toes forward, it's probably going to limit them quite a bit. I'm not saying that that's wrong to do that, but when we toe out, I can actually have them reach straight down like this and know that I'm maintaining good knee position and I'm tracking towards those toes. I want to see how low they can get and encourage that good pelvic position, because that's what I'm trying to train on that. Okay? Changing the base of support, I love using a box so that the free leg, if I'm going single leg stance, I love using a box so that the free leg can hang more naturally versus having to come out here or back behind, that again changes the pelvic position and can change that quality of movement. Loading patterns, same way with the deadlift. We've got some great options to go through front squat, goblet squat, and then box squat. Goblet squat being one, again, it's kind of like the sumo. We're going wider. We're accessing better, deeper motion in the hips. And we're basically challenging the anterior chain by holding that kettlebell right in front. Okay? So when we look at some of our variations, we're looking at the movement pattern quality itself and saying, how can I challenge it with some of these things that improve the movement pattern? And that's what we're looking for. Depth and quality of movement controlling the pelvis. And then speed, of course. When I look at drops and landings, I should be able to have my athletes and my clients go from this position here, drop, and see that same nice position in the pelvis. It should not change. Same thing with my box jump, jumping onto a box to take the impact out. I want the quality of landing to be solid, as well as that loading here all the way up to the top of the box, and then squat jumps. Same thing, okay? Guys, I know we ran through that pretty quick. Again, really appreciate your attention. That's how you get a hold of me. Please, please don't hesitate. If you want to see the videos and have access to that, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'll just give you access to exactly where they're at, I promise, okay? So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. You're awesome.